thing as adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation, quite an important topic. And adaptive radiation, see the two words are there, adaptive and radiation. So basically, it is a divergent evolution. Divergent evolution. So divergent evolution coming from adaptations. I'll give the example of Darwin finches. Darwin finches found on Galapagos Island. Darwin finches, which is found in on Galapagos Islands. Now, for this, a little, if you see the American south coast of America on the west side, western side, this is eastern, this is the western side. South America on the western coast, there are a number of such islands, total 13 islands found in the Pacific Ocean. This is the Pacific Ocean. So there are total 13 islands which are called as the Galapagos Islands. These islands are actually made up of sediments of larvae. Maybe many years ago there must have been a volcanic eruptions, and because of the sedimentation of the larvae these islands were formed. So Charles Darwin, we are talking about Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin in the year 1835, he traveled these islands in his ship called HMS Beagle. So the name of the ship was HMS Beagle, and in his this ship he traveled these islands, and he started looking at what was the type of organisms living in these islands, flora and fauna. So basically, he studied small dark birds found in these islands, and he found that beak of the bird, the beak of the bird was very different from each other in these islands. Now, if you look at the beak of a bird, it the beak is adapted to the food of the bird, like a grain eating bird or a seed eating bird, like say sparrow. It has a very small beak. Crow has a larger beak because crow is omnivorous. It can feed both on vegetable matter as well as animal matter. Um, a vulture, a kite, a hawk, they have a hooked beak, for tearing the flesh. So, what I want to tell you is the beak of the bird is adapted to the food habit, what type of food it is feeding. Like, say, a nectar sucking bird will have a very thin, pointed beak like a needle, just to pierce the flowers, enter into the inner parts of the flower and suck the nectar. Or a fish eating bird, like say a crane, you'll find that is a very big, long beak like this. So it doesn't have to put its head right into the water to catch a fish. Right from the top, it can look at and catch a fish. So, like say a huge crane, whereas a duck has a more a flatter, you know, duck has a flatter beak. So the duck has to put its head into the water to catch a fish. So like this, the what I here, so you've understood now that the beak of the bird is depending upon its feeding food habit. What is the food present? So Charles Darwin found that the beak of the bird was adapted to the food available in the islands. Some were insects were available. So insect, big rocks and lava logs, they have small, small holes in it. So the insects used to live inside these holes. So that type. Then there were some cactus growing in the islands. So they were vegetarian type of this thing. So they had to feed on the cactus. Some were fish eating, walrus and all that just to eat. So he saw that the beak of the bird was adapted to the food available in the islands. Now, he said that these birds, which were in these islands, basically came from an ancestral stock from the mainland. So, the mainland, this is the South African coast, this thing coast. So, from here, the birds they move to the different islands, and the shape of the bird beak change depending upon the food available. So they were of different species, so different species evolved. That is called adaptive radiation. Now see, so how do you define adaptive radiation? Adaptive radiation is the species evolution of new species from an ancestral species. So this is the ancestral, the main species is this one. So evolution of new species from an ancestral species in a very short period of time in a geographical location, in a geographical area. That is called adaptive radiation. So, this adaptive radiation, what all you have to write? Firstly, you have to give the definition. I told you what is the definition. It is the evolution of new species from an ancestral species, radiating, like radiating means divergent, isn't it? From an ancestral species in a very short period of time in a geographical area. So these are some of the points you have to mention, that evolution of new species from an ancestral species in a short period of time in a given geographical area is called adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation was example of this is the adaptation of beak depending upon the food available in the Galapagos Islands, studied by Charles Darwin. And later on, Charles Darwin, later on, these birds were named after him. So they are called as Darwin finches. So Darwin finches. And he used this ship in 1835 to move around these islands. Now, why this name, Galapagos? Why is it called Galapagos? Because these islands have a giant tortoise. It has nothing to do again with Darwin finches, okay? These islands have giant tortoise, which in native language is known as Galapagos. So the giant tortoise present in these islands gives the name Galapagos. So this is about adaptive radiation. And another example of adaptive radiation is the marsupial animals. Second example, marsupial animals found in Australia. Marsupial animals found in Australia. This is the second example of adaptive radiation. Now, what is marsupial? Marsupial is basically a pouch, a brood pouch, which is found in animals in which they keep their baby. And like, say, if I ask you an example of marsupial animals, all of you will say kangaroo. Kangaroo is a marsupial animal. It has a brood pouch. Now, the baby kangaroo, when it's born, it is just the size of a thumb size. So the baby is inside the mother's brood pouch, and the mammary glands are there only within, covered by the brood pouch. So the baby is feeding, and when the baby is about 1 feet uh, tall, it will come out of the brood pouch and live an independent life. So we know that only kangaroos have a marsupial. Now, marsupial animals are not found anywhere else in the world. You find it only in Australia. Australia may you find two important things in the mammals. One is duckbill platypus, that is the egg-laying mammal, and marsupial mammals. They are found only in Australia, nowhere else in the world. So it is showing what is called as a discontinuous evolution. Discontinuous means these type of organisms are found in only certain localities of the world. Now, why it is found only in Australia? Australia got separated from the rest of the world 60 million years ago. If you look at the world map, also you'll find Australia down here somewhere, isn't it? So Australia got separated from the rest of the world about 60 million years ago. And during that time, there were the egg laying mammals had evolved and marsupial mammals have evolved. So just you find it only in Australia, they were not able to move to any other rest of the part of the world. So that is one. And now marsupial mammals, adaptive radiation. If you have to write about marsupial mammal, you write marsupial mammal. Kangaroo is a marsupial mammal. Marsupial rat, marsupial mole. See, so lot of such marsupial organisms evolved, diverged in Australia. These are all found in Australia. Koala bear, bandicoot, wombat, Tasmanian wolf. So many marsupial mammals evolved in Australia, and they evolved in different parts, geographical areas. They were different from, obviously, slightly different from each other, depending upon the environment. They adapted to the environment. So, this is also an example of adaptive radiation. So, two examples of adaptive radiation, one is the Darwin finches. Dilip Kumar or Dilip Kumar. I'll just dealing myself for 5 minutes. I needed to take this call and then